class. Tonight we will be talking all about the upcoming holiday of Passover, which begins next Saturday evening. That will be the first Seder night. And I'm sure, of course, we are each preparing. There's definitely a lot to do. Shopping, preparing the home. But of course, in Judaism, we want to make sure that aside from being physically ready to celebrate the holiday, we also would like to discuss and learn some of the messages and meaning behind the traditions and teachings of Passover so that we can celebrate and take part in the Passover festivities, not just on a practical level, but also internally, emotionally, and intellectually. There was a congregant who was speaking with his rabbi before Passover, and he said, "Rabbi, there's a friend of mine who's unfortunately in quarantine with COVID. What can I do for him?" And the rabbi said, "Well, there's the perfect gift you can give him. If you take some matzah, you can just put it under the door and he and you can still stay safe." So of course we know the main food that we use to celebrate and do the mitzvah of Passover is the eating of the matzah, the flat, unleavened bread that our ancestors ate as they fled Egypt many, many years ago. So what's the idea behind the matzah? And what is its counterpart, the chametz? So in addition to actually eating the matzah, we are also commanded to get rid of chametz, which is leavened breads and foods. And we do that by cleaning out our homes and selling that which we cannot get rid of, because we are not supposed to be owning any chametz, any leavened foods over the duration of the holiday of Passover. And instead of eating the leavened, risen bread, we eat matzah on Pesach. So the question is, what is so frightening and awful about chametz that we are commanded to search for it, to get rid of it, not to be owning it, and instead to use bread of an unleavened form known as matzah? If we think about it a bit more deeply, it's actually quite strange, because throughout the year, there's absolutely no problem with consuming any kinds of leavened bread. It's part of our diets for many of us, and there is absolutely no problem with it. So why all of a sudden, for these specific 8 days of the year of Passover, suddenly there is something so awful about leavened bread? To take that even a step further, the holiday that follows Passover, that comes after Passover, 50 days following the holiday of Passover, Shavuot, there is actually a specific mitzvah, a specific commandment to bring a sacrifice, an offering in the temple, which consists specifically of chametz, of leavened bread. So not only do we have a situation where the leavened bread is permissible, but now it becomes an obligation that we must bring it as an offering, and it's so desirable. So this all seems a bit confusing. Is leavened bread bad? Is it neutral, or is it something positive? What are we to make of these different ideas? So there is actually a difference between the holiday of Passover and the holiday of Shavuot. And in that difference lies the understanding as to why on Passover it's so important for us to stay away from leavened bread and to eat matzah and unleavened foods. But when we get to Shavuot, it's a point where not only are we able to consume leavened foods, leavened breads, but we actually are commanded to bring it as an offering. So let's go down to the very basic components of the chametz and of the matzah. What are each of these two things made of? Well, matzah, the ingredients of matzah is flour and water. And while there are matzahs that are made with eggs and perhaps other ingredients as well, when we're speaking about the matzah that we are commanded and required to eat at the Seder, we're specifically supposed to eat matzah that is only comprised of of flour and water and nothing else. When we talk about chametz, leavened breads, so of course there's many ingredients that go into different types of breads and cakes, but the basis of any type of bread is flour and water as well. So at the core, really, matzah and chametz seem to be the same thing. What's the key difference between these two different foods? The difference is in the fact that with matzah, we are extremely careful to make sure that it doesn't rise at all, whereas with chametz, it does rise. So we also can see the similarity between matzah and chametz actually from the Hebrew letters that make up the names of each of these foods. And I'm going to show this to you so that you can visualize it. We have over here the two words written in Hebrew. At the top, you have the word chametz. As you can see, it has a chet, a mem, and a tzadik. Okay, that's the top word. And the bottom word is matzah. So you can see the first two letters of matzah and chametz are actually the same. They're switched. Pardon me. We have matzah and chametz. So we have the mem, the tzadik, and the hey. So two of the letters in these two words are identical. It might be hard for you to pick out those two letters because in the word chametz, which is at the top, the final letter is a tzadik. And the bottom word matzah, the middle letter is a tzadik. They don't look the same because when tzadik comes at the end of a word, it is written slightly differently, but it is in fact the same letter. So both of them have a tzadik, and both of them have a mem. The middle letter of chametz is mem. The first letter of matzah is mem. And then you have the remaining letter of each word. The first letter of the word chametz is a chet, and the final letter of the word matzah is a hey. If you look at the first letter of the word chametz and the final letter of the word matzah, even though they're two different letters, they are actually very similar in their form. The only difference is that the letter hey at the end of matzah, which is the lower word, has an opening in it, instead of the left leg being completely closed as the chet in the word chametz. There is an opening at the top of the leg of the letter hey. Now, this is not by chance. There is a reason for it. And the reason helps us to understand the meaningful difference behind chametz and matzah. If we look at the letter chet and the letter hey, the letter chet of the word chametz is closed. It doesn't have an opening or a space for anything to come inside of it. The letter hey does have an opening and gives space and gives room for something to come inside of it. And as we see with the physical form of the chametz and the matzah, the fact that the matzah is flat, whereas the chametz rises and puffs up, matzah represents humility, whereas chametz represents the ego, the inflated notion of the self that a person can have. So that's why this difference between the matzah not rising and the chametz being allowed to rise is such a critical difference. When a person is inflated and has a very puffed up ego, it's very hard for them to see outside of themselves, to see the other, to see that they are not the center of everything, to recognize that there is a higher power, there is a higher being, there is a creator, the God of the world, and he is the center. So the question becomes, where does my frame of reference start from? Does it start with my sense of self and who I am and what I think of myself? Or does it start from God, the higher power, the creator, the one who has a purpose for me and a purpose for this world? If it starts from me and myself, then my choices and my priorities come first. What I think, what I feel, what I desire. But if it starts with God at the center, then my focus becomes, what is needed of me? Why has God put me here? What is the purpose of this world? And then my perspective, my priorities, and my approach is entirely different. Another problem with being self-focused and having too much of an ego is that when there is somebody else who tries to come into my space, it contradicts my existence and it contradicts my accomplishments and my desires. And there isn't room for somebody else to come in and be part of the picture that I have. But when I'm like the matzah, when I do have that open space, I have that open door, I have the humility, then another person's existence and presence, not only does it not bother me, but it actually can be there to help and contribute to the purpose and the mission that I am trying to fulfill. So we can now understand why there is a danger in chametz, in a very inflated self-image, in a conceited ego. There's a tremendous potential for a lot of negativity to stem from there, which can lead a person down a road of self-destruction. So in that case, why is it permissible to eat chametz during the year? If we have so much to be afraid of with this ego and being too arrogant, then we ought to be in a matzah zone the entire year. How does it suddenly become permissible? And not only does it become permissible, but eventually, as we mentioned earlier, it actually becomes a mitzvah, a mandate from God that we must actually engage with the chametz and use it and offer it up as an offering in the holy temple itself. There is an analogy about a man who became very sick. And he came to the doctor. He was admitted to, he was brought in for a consultation. He had terrible digestive problems. His situation was so severe that the doctor told him that right now he needs to be only on a liquid diet because his digestive system and his gut needs to heal. And in order to allow himself to heal, he needs to just be on liquids, not to overtax. And that way he can be cured. So, of course, the man was very eager to be cured and become better. So he obeyed the doctor's instructions, and for many weeks, he diligently followed the liquid diet. One day the patient comes back to see the doctor to follow up on his progress. And the doctor examines the patient very carefully and says, okay, now you can return to a diet, varied foods with solid, normal, regular food. So the patient is taken aback and says to the doctor, what do you mean? You've been telling me all these weeks how harmful those foods are for me. So the doctor said, yes, they were very harmful for you. They would have been very harmful for you because you were sick. Your stomach couldn't tolerate anything heavier, and you needed to give it a chance to regain its strength and recuperate and become stronger. But now that you are feeling so much better, you need the nutrients from the proper foods. You need to consume these kinds of substances in order to continue the path of health and the path of proper living. This analogy is going to help us to understand the difference between the holiday of Passover and the holiday of Shavuot. What happened on Passover? The Jewish people were redeemed by God from Egypt. Egypt at the time was a severely corrupt and immoral place. And unfortunately, having spent so many hundreds of years under the influence and in the environment of Egypt, the Jewish people had been influenced a lot by all the things that were going on over there. So in a moral sense, they were sick and they needed healing. They needed to go to a place completely and totally removed from where they had been in Egypt. So when they were leaving Egypt, they were in a situation where they had to go to the extreme and not focus at all and not engage at all with the concept of Chametz, with the concept of leavening, of ego, and of inflated self-concept. They needed a real intense period of time to recognize God as the center and a higher purpose outside of them as the most important thing. They needed to go through that process of self-improvement. And that began on Passover with their leaving of Egypt. And from Passover through the days between that holiday and the holiday of Shavuot, which is the time when God gave us the Torah, the Jewish people were working on improving themselves and on becoming more worthy and more spiritually sensitive and more God attuned. By the time they came to Shavuot, they had made tremendous progress. And now they were able to transition to the healthy diet. Yes, having a sense of self and having an inflated ego can be damaging. But there is a very important component of it that is needed and is necessary in context and with responsibility. It's important for us to be proud of who we are, to be proud to be representatives of God and a good example of morality to society and to people around us. If we are too humble and only humble, we may become stepped on and disregarded. And that's not what we're looking for. So we need to be very cautious and careful how we use each of these things. We definitely need humility. We need to recognize our place in the picture. We are not the center. We need to allow God inside of us. We need to allow other people into our space. We need to make room. But we also need to have self-confidence, and we need to have pride so that we can properly represent the important ideas that we have to share with other people. And that is the positive element and the positive teaching that comes from Chametz, from leavened food. So being that we're at Passover now, let's delve a little bit further into the eating of the matzah. But before we get to that, the process of preparing the matzah. There is a very meticulous and careful process that is followed in harvesting, baking, preparing matzah. And because of its importance and because of the central idea that it represents, every detail of its preparation is so important. And when we are consuming that matzah, we're not just eating bread, unleavened bread, but we are also imbibing something spiritual and meaningful and holy, because it has been prepared according to specifications outlined in the Torah. And the more careful we are with that, the more impactful that experience of eating the matzah. Which is why it is so important that for Seder night, which is the nights when we fulfill the mitzvah of eating the matzah, we should seek to use matzah that is of the highest specifications according to the Torah. And that matzah is known as shmura matzah, which means that it's been watched, or also commonly translated as handmade matzah. This matzah is supervised not only during the baking, but from the moment of harvest. It is carefully watched to be sure that it doesn't come in contact with water until the time when it is ready to be baked. But the true element of what makes the matzah so special is because the intent that every single step of this process is for the sake of preparing and fulfilling the mitzvah of eating matzah, starting right from the beginning, from when we harvest the wheat, through the grinding, through the mixing with water, through the kneading and baking. That intention remains foremost in the minds of the people along the way who take part in this process. And that invests within the matzah a tremendous spiritual energy. It's the power and the holiness of the Torah and of God's word. I will share with you now a video so you can get an idea of the specifications that are followed throughout this process, and you can see it in a more visual way. So here it goes.
years ago, our ancestors left Egypt in such a hurry. There was no time for their dough to rise and become leavened. So they only had matzah to eat on their journey into the desert. Since the Exodus until today, we commemorate the miracle of leaving Egypt with the mitzvah of eating matzah after nightfall on the 14th of Nisan every year. How do we make these matzahs? Come and see. Any wheat that comes into contact with water may turn into chametz. Therefore, we are careful to watch the wheat from the harvesting so that it doesn't get wet. The wheat kernels are ground into flour and stored in an airtight room, protected from any dampness. Water is drawn the night before the baking and is stored in a cool place overnight. This is the reason for its name, Mayim Shalanu, since Shalanu means that which stayed overnight. This cooled water slows down the rising process. Contrary to bread, which is made from a variety of ingredients, such as eggs, sugar, and oil, the matzah's ingredients are only flour and water. Therefore, it is called poor bread because of its few ingredients. Now that we have the special water and dry flour, we can proceed with the baking. Let's time it and see how the bakers accomplish this task. The flour and water are mixed and kneaded quickly. Here is the dough. Now it will be kneaded again. This dough is being worked on constantly, so it has no opportunity to rise. This perforator pierces little holes in the dough, ensuring it to remain thin and baked well. The dough is now ready for the oven. The oven must be extremely hot, enabling it to bake quickly. How fast? Let's count together. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Wow, that's fast. Stop the timer. 3 minutes and we have fresh, kosher matzah. So every year on the Seder night, the matzah reminds us of the miraculous history of the Jewish nation. In order to fulfill the commandment of matzah, at least 1/3 of a matzah must be eaten after nightfall within 4 minutes. We can learn about the unique qualities of the matzah from the Zohar, where it is called the food of faith and food of healing. Eating matzah on Pesach strengthens our Jewish faith and keeps us healthy. Have a kosher and happy Passover.
So we can see the meticulous and involved process and the speed at which the matzah is prepared in order to be sure that it is not given any opportunity to rise at any moment during this process. And we discussed the spiritual energy that is infused in the matzah through following this process. And as was mentioned in the video at the end, the Kabbalah teaches us that specifically the energy that is present in the matzah that we eat on the first night of Passover has the energy of faith, and the matzah consumed on the second night of Passover is called bread of healing, which is obviously something which is very much on all of our minds, specifically this year. So the way we fulfill this commandment is after nightfall, next week, Saturday night and Sunday night, to consume at least a third of a matzah, and that should preferably be done within a time frame of 4 minutes to fulfill the mitzvah. Obviously, that is magnified and beautified by coming along as part of the process of the entire Pesach Seder, which includes eating maror and drinking 4 cups of wine, as well as recounting the story of the Exodus through reading the Haggadah, and specifically doing as much as we can to involve the children in this wonderful celebration and tradition. On the thought of matzah being food of faith and food of healing, I would like to share with you the following teaching. So we discussed that the first night is the food of faith and the second night, the matzah, is the food of healing. Why does it come in that order? So if we look at the second paragraph over here, this is coming from the book called the Hayom Yom, which was written by the Lubavitcher Rebbe. It's a calendar with Hasidic and Jewish thoughts specific for every day. So let's read the second paragraph. He's quoting the Alter Rebbe, the first Rebbe, the founder of Chabad Hasidism. The matzah of the first evening of Pesach is called the food of faith. The matzah of the second evening is called the food of healing. When healing brings faith, we say, thank you, God, for healing me. Then clearly there has been illness. When faith brings healing, there is no illness to start with. So when a person, God forbid, is feeling sick, and then, God willing, with God's help, is cured, and he or she recognizes that God has brought them to a state of healing and to a cure, and they turn to God and they acknowledge that, and they thank God for his kindness in healing them. So there has been an illness, there has been a sickness, and following the sickness came a display of faith. What the Alter Rebbe is saying over here is, when we have the faith first, we trust in God, and we put our faith and hope in him, then the sickness doesn't have to come to begin with. That's what we are aiming for. We would like that we should have the faith and recognize God, and then we should have no need to become sick in order to become healed. How to fulfill, an easy way to fulfill the mitzvah discussed earlier of making sure that we don't own any chametz for the duration of the Passover holiday, as we explain the importance of staying away from any vestige of that kind of thing. We have the tradition to sell our chametz before the onset of the holiday. And by doing that, we fulfill the mitzvah of getting rid of chametz, as we should during Passover. So if you'd like an easy way to fulfill this obligation, you can go online to our website, chabadriverwoods.com/sell chametz. Okay, that's one word. So chabadriverwoods.com/sell chametz. That's SELLCHAMETZ. And you can fill the form out over there, and the chametz will be sold on your behalf. We will be distributing the Shmur Matzah for your convenience. If you'd like to be sure that you are on our list to receive this special matzah to fulfill the mitzvah of eating Shmur Matzah at the Seder, you can contact us through our website, chabadriverwoods.com/contact, and we will be happy to make sure that you have this first-rate special matzah for your Seder. I just would like to end off by wishing each and every one of you a very wonderful Passover, a healthy Passover, and a happy and enjoyable holiday for all of us. We will be taking a break for the next 2 weeks from our classes due to the holiday, and once the holiday is over, I will be in touch about resuming with our next topic. So have a wonderful holiday and a very good night.